the quote said, relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. And for a second, I'm thinking, that's kind of cool. And then he turns around and says, yeah, I think that's Philip McKernan's quote. And I went, shit, is that my quote? I didn't even know that was my quote. But it's true. I mean, to me, vulnerability is horrific, particularly when it comes to parenting, particularly when it comes to leadership. And most people still continue to see it as a weakness, which is unfortunate. I think a lot of our behavior is driven by emotion. I think a lot of us are trying to avoid emotion, or we're trying to feel a certain emotion. And it drives a lot of our decision making. And by understanding our stories and how we feel about certain things in the world and how we interpret how things happen to us and the associations that we place in those, gives us a huge insight into who we are and how we can operate in the world.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human podcast. Today we got a special episode with Philip McKernan. How you doing, my man?
I'm very good. Thank you very much.
Excellent. And for the audience, this I'm reading his bio, and the thing that jumped out to me was this big, bold sort of statement at the top of your bio, Philip, which says 90% of people die with regret, and I work with the other 10%. And gets into the fact that you're a speaker, you're an author. I love this. Enlightened hooligan. I think is probably one of the best things to be. You're building a castle now. You're flying around the world. You're working with people. You're helping them grow. Anyway, my man, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's great. It sounds very, the introduction sounds very cool, but it's not always very cool. I have my ups and downs as well, like every other human.
Yeah, well, I think, that's what we're going to get into today. And you're going to share a little bit about how you manage some of those ups and downs and sort of, how you navigate those waters. First, let's talk about this castle. I mean, that was like ahead in your bio, which is you're back in Ireland, right? I know you're a little bit of a globetrotter. You've been into something like over 80 countries, right? You've built an orphanage in Peru. You've flown around, you've helped, but you're back in Ireland right now building a castle. Tell me about the castle.
Yeah. So the castle has been here for over 500 years. It's actually right behind me, and it's painted white. People say, why did you paint it white? Well, we didn't. Every single castle in the country, whether it's small, big, or indifferent, there was whitewash on it for various different reasons, which you won't get into right now. So we came across this little Gaelic castle that's been here for over 500 years. This was the seat of the leadership. I've been trying to buy a cottage in this little valley for the last, the previous maybe 7 to 10 years. And it didn't work out. And then this place came up, and it's buried in a rainforest, a Celtic rainforest. There's trees all around us. And we came back to look at this. It just felt we were drawn to it. And we walked into it. The place was in shit. I mean, there was rats, bats, and just mold and green and water coming down through it. And I looked at my wife in the Great Hall. And again, it's modest, but it's big in terms of the energy and the feeling and the impact. And she looked at me and she said, it's perfect. I think what she meant to say, it's perfect with its imperfections. But it just spoke to us, and we see ourselves less as investors or owners and more as stewards of this place. And it's become very clear that this place is a place for people to come, and it's a place for the work that we do rather than us personally, is how it transpired. But it's been a privilege.
You're hosting a lot of retreats there?
Very few. We're only going to be basically doing probably two front-facing, like public-facing events a year here. Yeah. Very, very intimate. But it's an amazing place for that because you're on the West Coast. The landscape is amazing. Cool. Just walking into the place just feels like it kind of invites you to go deeper and kind of, really stirs you as well energetically. So it's pretty epic.
Well, I'm building an investment property in Costa Rica to build and to sell, but I mean that has not even reachable, not even like comparable, better word, than your castle. And by the way, who owned the castle 500 years ago? Do you know the history of it?
So it was built by a family called the O'Loughlin's, and they ran the Kingdom of the Burren, which is this landscape that we find ourselves in, which essentially was the bottom of the ocean a couple of million years ago. And, maybe many more millions of years ago. Yeah. And one thing we found out, which I think is really interesting, is we became stewards. We purchased the place. We became owners of it. And we got a historian to dig into some of the history that we could get. And it turns out they built 22 castles, and 21 of them are built in this kind of a circular pattern, like spreading out over miles to protect one, which is the house of the leader, the home of the leader. And it turns out that was the one that we'd become owners of, which was amazing. Just bizarre to find that out considering the work that we do, but also it made sense because they didn't just build castles on the side of cliffs for defense and things like that. There was a lot of thought put into it, but this place doesn't have what appears to be a defensive purpose. So therefore it definitely had a different purpose, and community was one of those.
Well, I talk a lot about this lately is the importance of community. I think after the pandemic, this is one of the main things that was shattered or fractured, maybe a better
Mm,
term, is people's relationships, and not, our individual relationships with our families, for example, but the community at large, like our work community, our actual neighborhoods where we live.
mm,
Um, and I mean, you spent enough time in Canada, so you know what it's like. But Canada, very specifically, right, when it comes down to
mm,
this. And I was chatting with this. His name's Ken Arley, incredible thought leader and behavioral psychologist, and behavioral economics. He was talking about the residual impact of it, that people really haven't recovered, which kind of leads me into the work that you do. And I don't
mm.
want to butcher it. You explained it so beautifully before, which is the type of coaching you do, which is from, I think you described it as soul versus mind. Can you walk me through that?
Yeah. Yeah, just on the COVID thing. I mean, I think I'm still paying the price of COVID because what I did was right or wrong. It felt like the right thing at the time was to go all in and supporting other people. And I neglected to kind of mourn or to face the reality of what was going on. And I think, to some extent, I had a delayed kind of reaction to the trauma of all of that. So it's real. It's absolutely real. I'm glad you brought that up. The work we do, I'll sum it up in one word, and it's soul set rather than mindset. It's not that we're vilifying mindset. Mindset is really, really important. We understand the power of the mind, or we don't understand how powerful it can be. And there's a big emphasis on mindset. Our work is all about, what and how emotion drives us, and how our stories drive us, and how to become aligned with the work we do, the places we live, and the people that we hang out with. And more importantly, even beyond all of that, is developing a really healthy relationship with ourselves, having a degree of compassion, having a degree of empathy, having a degree of confidence and understanding of our own behaviors, not just intellectually, but emotionally, and making decisions from that point and that place is what in our opinion, builds that muscle of creating a life that really means something rather than just focusing on money and means in the hope that it all works out in the end.
Yeah, is it difficult taking people there? I mean, getting them past the whole concept of mindsets and into soul set? Because by the way, I agree with you, right? It's the stories we live with. It's the stories that we tell ourselves and that we tend to believe. It drives how we feel. Feelings, emotions drive the behavior. And this is all at a very unconscious level, right? So, when people are first sort of approaching this type of, call it coaching and work that you do, is there a chasm to get people through, right? Or do you find
Yeah,
people
great
lead into the
question.
stuff?
Great question. I think we used to see it as a chasm that we needed to fill. And I think that was a big mistake. We needed to convince them and explain to them the importance of this work. And what would happen is sometimes we would do that, and other times we wouldn't do that. But sometimes we'd get the person that was convinced and the other person that was semi-convinced. They'd come to a room, they'd sit in a room with us, and they would fight the concept. They'd fight the invitation. They would fight the work. They'd fight themselves. They'd fight me. So we would also then sometimes attract a person that actually hit a wall. They built a business, they've had a degree of success, and suddenly they're miserable, or they've gone through a divorce, they've lost somebody, something in their lives changed, and they therefore said, shit, I've got to change, something needs to change. And that is somebody who's in a reactionary space, who again is not our ideal client. Our ideal client is somebody who's tasted success, but hasn't had the matching sense of satisfaction that comes with that. In other words, they've got to the top of the mountain, they're looking around and going, shit, I thought I would feel better about myself. And they're just about to make another mistake, and that is, oh, I've just climbed the wrong mountain. When I climb that mountain, then I'll be happy, assuming that that will solve the problem. And generally speaking, it doesn't, because the same pattern repeats itself. So our clients tend to be, and I hate to use this word sophisticated because that sounds really arrogant. It's the best word that I can find right now. Sophisticated in the sense they have enough awareness about what's worked. They realize they don't have all the answers, and they want to take a step back and be challenged at a deeper level. And that's the sort of person that we're attracting right now. And there's no chasm with them. They're ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. The pursuit of happiness. I mean, isn't that what it's all about in some capacity, that we're all trying to drive to that happiness? And we're living in a world right now, which in some cases is pretty hard to be happy, right? And then sometimes I think what I heard you say as well is people get distracted. You get distracted driving down this path and running up this mountain, and, you got you're staring down, you're not looking at ahead. And by the time you look up, you're like, oh shit. Have I gone the right way? I've gone barreling. I use the other analogy, which is you go barreling down the mountain, and halfway you go, shit, am I even going in the right direction right now? So talk to me and the audience a little bit about sort of what that work looks like. I mean, where do people begin with this? So someone's, in the words, they're successful, they've realized they're willing to do the work. What does the coaching and a retreat and this type of work, where does it begin and what do we go through?
Yeah, so the work I created 14 years ago was through the body of a body of work through the lens of an event we call Brave Soul. So Brave Soul essentially was the work I wish I'd done, maybe now looking back 25, 30 years ago. And there's only one starting point for me every single time, whether it's a private client or a client that comes to a retreat, and that is, tell me your story. But not tell me a story in the way that you've been traditionally telling your story. Like, hey, I grew up in Boston. I went to this college. I got this job. I did an internship. I opened this business. I whatever. I got married. I have 2 kids, etc. That's not the story. I have no interest in that story. Okay. That's the story That's the story intellectually I want to go into a deeper narrative. I want to understand what love was like in your house. How did you see it? How did you experience it? Did you matter? Were you heard? Did people see you? What was your relationship to money? What was your, what did you witness? What did you experience? What meaning did you place on things that didn't have a whole lot of meaning to begin with? And to build a really strong sense, not just intellectually, but emotionally, about what made that person and what foundation was planted that has created a lot of your behaviors today. Because a lot of us are making decisions today based on our past, not based on what we think we want for the future. So to me, it always starts with the story. And then what we do is we look at your present and you start to understand how your story has not just influence, but it's pretty much designed. And the outcome is your present, and therefore it's writing the script for the future. But if we aren't aware of it, we can't rewrite the script for the future. So it always starts in our personal story, where a lot of people, and this is a hesitation of some, because I don't want to go on a retreat and just look at my story. I want to focus on forward facing. I want to go forward. And I go, yeah, we back to the future or whatever you want to call it. We go back in order to go forward. But without that, I won't work with anybody. If somebody is not willing to go into their story and to share their story and to find nuances in their story that perhaps they're not aware of, to me, that's just not the person I want to work with. It's not the work that I do or don't do. It's to me, that's the foundation of everything.
Yeah. I mean, would you agree that like the work you do, I do, the industry in this world, the individual needs to operate with a sense of vulnerability. They need to be willing to sort of peel back those layers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think vulnerability is key, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. To me, it's the greatest. I was at an event, you'll have a laugh with this one. I'm at an event, I'm sitting in the audience, and somebody puts up a quote, and they said that the quote said, relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. And for a second, I'm thinking, oh, it's kind of cool. And then he turns around, his name is Jason Gaynor, I don't know if you know him, but Jason then says, yeah, I think that's Philip McKernan's quote. And I went, shit, is that my quote? I didn't even know that was my quote. I think it's my quote.
You're like, that's me. I'm in the audience, right?
I think he knew I was there, but it was like, he put it up and then he referenced me. But it's true. I mean, if you look at any relationship that's deepened over any period of time, the moments that it drops another level, whether it's an inch or a mile, is moments of vulnerability, forced or invited, or unforced vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And if that's matched in a relationship, it can continue to deepen. If you check out of that, well, then it goes back to a flatline relationship. To me, vulnerability is critical, particularly when it comes to parenting, particularly when it comes to leadership. And most people still continue to see it as a weakness, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. So if we were to sort of put it into simple terms, what is vulnerability? I mean, how does someone act and how does someone demonstrate that vulnerability? What would they be doing? Because we hear the word vulnerability, right? And I think, sometimes the definitions to things or our perception to what it is a little different. How do you define vulnerability? What would it look like and sound like?
It's showing people all of you, or it's allowing people to see all of you. That's all it is. It's just your truth. And yet I think you touched on something so simple and so profound. And that is, it's not the definition. It's the perceived definition that we've created. Some people is vulnerability. What comes up? Oh, cutting my veins open and pouring my guts on the table. So I think how you perceive vulnerability tells you a lot about your relationship to vulnerability. To me, vulnerability is simply the ability to allow people to see more of you or all of you. And I've seen this firsthand, by the way. I wrote a book called One Last Talk, where we ask people to stand on stage and give the one last talk they'll ever give before they die. Now, it sounds very morbid. It's anything but morbid. It's actually extraordinary. And every single time, two things happen. Number one is people go, oh, shit, I don't have a story. You should call Greg. Oh my God. Oh my God. Greg's story is unbelievable. And he's a great speaker. You should get him. And I go, no, we don't want Greg today. We want you today. That's number one. The second thing is people don't believe they have a story and they are unwilling to tell the story that they perceive is going to make them look bad. And yet every time they go deep and share a part of their story, two things happen. One is they're released of the story, the shame, the guilt, the whatever. And two is somebody in the audience in this part of the world or another part of the world sees that actually I am not alone. And all they do is get love. All they do is get love and acceptance. It's all that's ever happened with the One Last Talk, whether it's in a corporation or whether it's on a stage with individuals in a room. So vulnerability is the key. The challenge with vulnerability, it's kind of become a sexy buzzword. And I say this with love and respect. I've been at events where a speaker gets on stage and they're trying to be vulnerable. And I use the word trying to be vulnerable because you can see that they're trying to be vulnerable in order to win an audience or because they feel they need to be. And you can just tell they're not ready for that vulnerability. They're just not there yet.
It becomes an exercise for them or a tactic, a better way to describe that instead
Correct.
of
Correct.
You know, for the audience, Philip and I were chatting before we started recording and just sharing little bits. And I was like, listen, this just, I got a phone call right now from my wife. And this is what happened. She actually got let go. And, you know, the whole conversation of not so much the job was the pain point, but the feeling of rejection. And you looked at me and you're like, are you sure you're ready to record it? Like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. But, you know, I think I've always operated this way. You know, my healing has always come through my emotional vomiting and transparency. And this is what's going on in my life. And this is sort of what we're sort of dealing with and stuff. And I don't know how to be any other way. And I see a lot of my male clients actually have a lot of challenge with vulnerability. They're quick to nurture and to protect and look after, and as leaders sort of, you know, do the coaching thing, but they're just not willing to sort of open up that kimono. I don't know if you've seen the same thing or if you have the same type of experience specifically with men.
I have. And what I would offer is something that might come across as really obnoxious, but this is what I'm feeling right now. And the second thing is I might get blamed for it, but as long as they don't blame you for it, all you're doing today is holding a container for me to share something that's hopefully valuable and maybe something that will insult them. But there's a selfishness in that. And that might sound really unfair to make that statement because I don't know these men that are unwilling to open up their kimono, as you talk about, and unwilling to share. But the selfishness comes in the sense that by their unwillingness to be vulnerable, particularly if they're in any type of leadership role, even if they're leading one person, never mind 50 or 100 or 1,000, is what they're doing is by not being vulnerable, they're creating a culture of a lack of vulnerability. So the vulnerability should always come from us. But in the absence of being able to tap into that authentically, I think it's okay to experiment with vulnerability in order to serve other people. And a quick example of that, I had a CEO in a company in the UK who shared a one last talk in front of his entire company. And he was really nervous. He was beyond nervous. And he went through the process. And it's not about sharing a one last talk about how the political landscape should change or global warming or anything. It's about your own personal narrative. And he got such an overwhelming standing ovation. And people came up to him and opened up to him in ways they'd never done before. Now, I'm not suggesting we should have a culture of being vulnerable deeply every single moment of every single day. But I think there has to be a place, because if you think about vulnerability through the lens of my perception of it, which is just allowing people to see you, there's something very innately human about that. And by a leader refusing to be vulnerable creates a culture of a lack of vulnerability, which basically means vulnerability is not cool, which in my opinion, I'll finish here, is taking humanity out of the business place, which is a tragedy because that's where most of us spend most of our awake time in the business or in work.
Right. And it's a community. We were talking about this before, you know, you're right. We spend the majority of our time. I think the number can actually get up to 80% of our time can be spent in our professional lives. Right. And, wow, you know, after the pandemic, you know, there's just been this sort of hesitancy to come back in quotations to work, right? The corporate stuff is people don't want to come back to the office. And I'm like, it's not even about that. Right. It has nothing to do with getting people back to the office for work. It's about getting these people back together in a group, right? Because we're a herd animal, right? We need to live within a community and a group. And if we're not careful, this, hybrid remotes is going to lead to more isolation than connection. And then vulnerability, as we said, it's going to be jeopardized even further.
Absolutely. And I would even go a little further in the sense that, or maybe just wider, deeper, whatever you want to call it. And that is, I think post COVID, I think this idea of remote work is great in some ways, but I do think I agree with you that it does create a kind of a sense of disconnection and further, you know, um, splinters us from other people. But I would argue, and I certainly found this within myself, like during COVID, I became disconnected almost from myself. And it's almost like, and this might sound too woo woo or too corny for some, but it's like kind of reconnecting with myself, who I am, what my mission is, you know, where am I in alignment? Where am I not in alignment? And I find that actually that allows me to connect to other people or like-minded people in a particular way. But yeah, no, I would be concerned about our, the way in which we're isolating, and Zoom and technology right now. You and I are talking from different parts of the world. I'm in the pissings of rain in Ireland, and you're, I think, in Costa Rica, and probably most likely sunny outside. So technology is great, but it also is splintering us to some extent as well, and we got to be careful.
Correct. For this type of stuff, I think it's fantastic. You know, the next
Agreed.
exercise in all of this is we get out to Ireland, or you come down to Costa Rica, and, you know, we'll do a retreat in Costa Rica if you want.
Exactly. I'd love that. Yeah, that'd be cool.
So talk to me a little bit, and the audience a little bit, about this whole world of emotional management, getting in tune with your emotions. You know, where do I begin? I mean, what does that journey look like?
Again, it's back into our stories. I think a lot of our behavior is driven by emotion. I think a lot of us are trying to avoid emotion, or we're trying to feel a certain emotion, and it drives a lot of our decision making. And by understanding our stories and how we feel about certain things in the world, and how we interpret how things happen to us, and the associations that we place in those, gives us a huge insight into who we are, and how we can operate in the world. I think we've been rewarded in society for living in our heads, for honoring the intellect, and society applauds us for that and puts us on a pedestal for that. And, you know, the current society doesn't have a lot of bandwidth for deeper emotion. But if you don't deal with emotion, what ends up happening is it comes out anyway. So your clients possibly, or probably sometimes find that they get very angry, for example, just one emotion. And you turn around and say, so you're angry. Oh, no, I'm not angry. I said, well, hang on. When was the last time you got angry? Oh, somebody cut me off in the traffic in Vancouver, and I jumped out of the car. I was going to kill them. So, well, what happened? So, oh, well, it just came out. Well, it came out of where? Your pocket or your ass? It came out of you. So you're carrying this anger. So I'm finding that a lot of people are very, very angry, but they're passively angry. They're not in touch with it. They don't associate it with it. They don't feel they're angry, and they wouldn't categorize themselves as an angry person, because there is no place. Tell me about the last place that you walk by. Is it next to Starbucks, the angry place where you go in and talk about anger? There's no place in society for it. It's seen as a negative emotion. And yet every single human in the world struggles with anger. So when you don't experience emotion, it just gets stored, gets built up, gets built up. I remember years ago, I'm sitting in a movie theater, and I'm tears are pouring down my face, and I'm watching some shitty movie where the dog dies. And it's a fucking actor dog. It's not even dead.
Was it
And
called
I'm
Marley
bawling.
and Me? By the way, Marley
It
and
could
Me.
have been. I don't know. I don't.
I
I don't
fucking
know.
bawled my eyes out as well during that movie. I was like, this is just too much.
Yeah, but I'm bawling my eyes out, like to the point where the chair is shaking, and my girlfriend at the time looks at me and goes, "What is wrong with you?" And the point was, my reaction was way disproportionate. Like, I'll cry, no problem, but it was way disproportionate, my level of emotion. And I ended up finding myself in a therapy session about 2 to 3 to 4 weeks later. And she said, why are you here? And I said, I cried over some dead dog in a movie. It's not even a real dog dead. And she just said, tell me about your life. And before I know it, she's looking at me going, and you're surprised you're crying over a movie? I'm surprised you're not bawling your eyes out now with the amount of shit that's going on. And I think what we've done is we've normalized pain in our life. And the way I would describe this is, imagine I could go to Dublin where my mother lives, and I have a probe. And this probe, I put it into my arm, and I put the other end into my mother's arm. And just for a moment, I could feel the amount of pain my mother's in, physical pain. She has osteoarthritis, arthritis, brittle bone, different things. I would probably fall to my knees and scream in agony. One, because I'm weak and I'm not a good patient, but two is because that pain has become so normalized in her life that she's put up with it and she's accepted it. And that's what I find with leaders and humans and entrepreneurs I work with is they've normalized misalignment. They've normalized chaos. They've normalized busyness and not even normalized it. They're getting applauded for it.
Yeah,
So therefore, why would I change it?
Romanticized.
Totally. So when I work with somebody, I don't think I have any issues. And I'm not looking for your issues. I'm looking for the subtleties and the misalignments that you're not even aware that are there. And I just find that absolutely fascinating is so much of who we are and what's driving us emotion. And yet so many of us work tirelessly to stay away from our emotions. And that always comes out in the end. Always.
Yeah. I think it begins when we're kids, as you know, right? You get your parents saying, I had my father, I'll give you something to cry about, which is you quickly learn how to bottle up emotions. Most people, 100%. The way they handle that emotion, and I like what you talk about, that sort of passive aggressive or that, that passive anger that people operate with, is majority of people go through the suppression of that emotion. It's what we call unexpressed emotion. And you were talking a little bit about those emotional markers that are left over, right? So as I'm facing these new experiences in the future, I'm drawn right back to that emotional memory, that marker, right? And it's at an unconscious level. And again, what do the majority of us do when it comes down to it? You bite your tongue and you internalize it and you hold it in and right? And, do you know anything about debriefing, by the way? The whole concept of debriefing?
No.
Someone goes through a traumatic event, and psychology or therapy is based on debriefing, which is come in and tell me your story. That's what you were describing before. But the real good therapist or coach or psychologist will give you the space to tell your story, first, uninterrupted, second, without judgment and criticism, third, without minimizing, and fourth, without problem solving. Right. It's one of the models I teach when it comes down to listening. And it's amazing at how many people need to share their story. They don't even realize it. I find myself on planes in sort of places where a complete stranger will come up and emotionally vomit and just tell me their whole story in 2 minutes. And I think, wow, well, they probably know what I do for a living. I was in the pool. I recently had back surgery, so I've just had to start to rehab it, and the pool's been part of it. Anyway, I'm in the pool, snorkels on, goggles are on, come up to the end of the pool, and there's this guy there huffing and puffing. Anyway, I give him a little nod, like, hey, keep it up, big guy. He's like, oh man, gotta tell you, just quit smoking. It's been 20 years. Tried this, blah, 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 blah. Like for 2 minutes, rambled on. I was like, okay, snorkel back in there and I'll see you at the next lap type of thing. But I was reminded about how important it is that people have space to share their stories. But none of them, and what you're talking about, none of them will actually go and do the work to do that sometimes. They won't actually make that a proper exercise, a proper conscious effort to go and work through some of the stories. So I love the fact that a lot of your work and coaching begins with tell me the story and not the surface level story, right? That little boy inside of you story. Very cool.
Yeah. I remember there was a guy who came from Vancouver. And he came all the way to Ireland to a retreat. And the first couple of days, we look at the story, and people were kind of making comments, like kind of just jovially, say, God, you had a perfect childhood. And he was going, yeah, well, that wasn't perfect, but it was pretty good. And it got to him to the point where he was realizing that certain people were getting breakthroughs and ahas and realizing that things weren't as awesome as they thought. And he came up to me and he said, Philip, he said, what is it? Like, I had a perfect childhood. Like, am I missing something? Like, what would you recommend I do? And I just looked at him and I said, nothing other than question the story you've been telling yourself. And I said, and I'll see you tomorrow morning. And the following morning he walked in. This is not a word of a lie. He walked in, he put his hand up in my room. Like no one has to put their hand up. Put his hand up. He said, Philip, can I speak? I said, of course you can speak. You don't need to put your hand up. And he said, do you remember the story I told on day one about me cycling around on my bike and having this free childhood and feeling like the world was at my feet and feeling so connected? He said, it's bullshit. He said, I cried last night like I haven't cried before because I got in touch with how lonely my childhood was. Now, in isolation, somebody might be listening to this and going, great. So he came all the way to Ireland and all you did was shattered the illusion that he was holding on to about his life, and you've actually just got him to realize that it wasn't as rosy and as negative. It's actually much broader than that. What transpired from that is I said, okay, great. So thank you for that. Number one. Two is it's great that you realize that. How does that show up today? And he said, I am an island. I'm an absolute island. I am not connected to my family. I love them, but I don't open up my heart. I have an open door policy in work, which is bullshit because it's only on the basis that they come in and tell me what I want to hear. Is it open? So it's not really open. It's conditionally opened. And I set myself up to make sure that I can never be hurt emotionally. So that is the power of understanding your story. And most of us have an interpretation of our story that isn't actually accurate in reality as we look forward. And it's not about, the one last thing I'll say in this, it's not about vilifying anybody. It's not about going back and vilifying his parents for being neglected. It's actually about understanding what actually happened so you can rebuild relationships and create forgiveness and acceptance and so on and so forth. So actually it brings people closer together.
Yeah. Well, back to the whole debriefing model, what you're describing is after the story, we get those details, like we figure out more of the facts around it. And then there's something called normalize their experience, which, as you said, it's not about villainizing people or the parents. It's about going, okay, I get it now, right? This feeling I'm going through, this loneliness, this isolation, this island. It's not abnormal. I'm not a unicorn. I'm not this mystical creature that I've been the first to. It's normal. And it kind of brings us back to the group, right? Where everyone else is. I mean, I'm interested. Yeah. So in your retreats, like, what is the duration? Like, this story, I mean, the guy came out, and how long was the retreat, and how much time did it take him to get to that sort of aha moment?
The retreat length for Brave Soul is 6 days or so. It took him about 2.5 days to actually realize that he'd been holding on to a particular story. And that to me was, he had distanced himself from the story. He was kind of stuck in his head. What I find is as people land in Ireland, their bodies are physically here, their heads are in the airport, and their hearts are on a plane halfway across the Atlantic. So it takes them a while to catch up. And you'll see patterns like they want to listen to podcasts. They brought 5 personal growth books. This is their time to read it. And they're taking copious amounts of notes. And I actually encourage them, and they're on their phones. And I encourage them to let go of their phones, take their laptops away with their permission, not read, not consume, not busy themselves with stuffing information into their brains, their mind, and their hearts, and allow what wisdom is trying to come through them to emerge. It generally takes people about 2 or 3 days to land for the work to really start to take a grip. And there's some people, I'll be honest with you, some people that will actually spend the entire week just barely treading water. If I can get into this week and out the other end without falling apart, without getting emotional, without being vulnerable, and people will pay sometimes thousands of dollars, travel thousands of miles for the clarity that they don't actually want. And people are like, sorry, what did you just say? Some people want to be seen to do the work, but they don't want to actually do the work. And you can see when somebody is fighting themselves, fighting the room, and fighting me. And I used to fight them back because I care so much. Now I just go, you're not ready. It's great that you're here. Settle in. But John over there wants to say something, or Mary has something she wants to share. And by actually ignoring that fighting energy is the very time they land into something really powerful.
Yeah. I was going to say, as you were talking about like people showing up with the 5, personal development and self-help and growth books and the podcast and all that stuff, isn't it interesting that people sometimes get caught up in the doing and not the actual practicing of it? It's very easy to sign up for the course and the retreat and listen to the podcast and read the book and be like, oh, I've read every book, and oh, I've done this course and I've done this, but it's something completely different to do the work. Do you find that do you find that in some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, 100%. And again, this might sound really facetious and judgy, but I'll often say to people, how many books do you read? And some people they've so much pride around the amount of books they're reading. And I'll say, well, what would it be like just to suspend consuming information just for a month, 2 months, 3 months? Just what would happen? The reaction to that tells me everything I need to know. If it actually sends a chill through their spine, it's really interesting. The other thing is somebody will read a book and they'll say, this book changed my life. And I go, brilliant, great. How? And they go, what do you mean? I said, no, it changed my life. I said, no, I hear that. And it's brilliant. But how did it change your life? And sometimes they don't have something that's very simple or very solid or foundational that actually they've changed. So we've become very, what's been normalized is the amount of consumption of information has become normalized. And we're not stopping to say, to me, I think, what if we just read one book that really landed and spoke to us? We just read that book once and we read it again. And we just took something out of it each time for like 2 or 3 months and just implemented that one thing. And a lot of us are reading in books and copious amounts of information, not because we want to learn, but because we don't want to miss out. So it's actually driven by a lot of scarcity rather than a desire to learn and to grow. And they're very, very different energies. When I work with athletes, I love football, soccer. And I've been very fortunate to marry what I do and what I love to do with the sport that I love. And somebody says, can you help me be a better footballer? And I said, no, I can help you be a better human. And when we work on the humanness of you, the person, a better player is going to emerge. I can guarantee you that. So to me, everything off the ice or everything off the pitch is my business. And when we work on that, what happens is they play freer and they play with less scarcity. And every single time, if they do the work and they step in, that's the result.
Yeah. And the truth to those books is you don't retain a lot of the information.
Correct.
Right? Unless you keep going back to it. You know, I like what you said there. I had a very similar conversation with a client literally last week. So we're in their leadership sessions. We're sort of midway through it. It's a program that runs over several months, and we do a bunch of group days, and we do a bunch of individual stuff. And there's one individual, so it was actually getting to some of their scenarios, and she just opened up. And like, this was not the person that I was expecting to open up, because like there was a lot of privacy to this individual. And I actually ended up connecting with them before the session, and they're like, look, I don't want to bring this up in the session. Anyway, we get to the afternoon. Who's got a scenario they want to talk about? Boom, hand shoots right up, and she just opens the kimono, right? Here is what's going on in my life. Anyway, I was speaking to one of the owners, the partners, and he said, you know, do you think it's okay that like we got into all that personal stuff and it wasn't a lot of business scenarios? And I said the same thing. I said, it's the human that we are working on. So when they show up in work, they'll be clear. They would have resolved this stuff. So they're going to be a better player. So I completely agree with you. It's about, I mean, that's where the name of the show comes from, right? Better human. That's what's important. Once I'm a better human, I could be a better parent. I could be a better spouse. I could be a better leader. I could be a better entrepreneur. But it is about working on self. And I love what you talked about, which is, I'll just paraphrase, which is the importance of doing the work, not just going to the course.
Yeah. To think that when we drive home from work and park our car and walk down the drive and into the house, to think that we can leave all our work and everything around that and the stress behind is bullshit. And to think that you can go to your job and walk in the door and to leave all your personal stuff behind is equally bullshit over a period of time. And a lot of owners would say, or business owners or leaders would say, well, it's not my responsibility to take care of somebody's personal stuff. I said, I don't think it is your responsibility, but it's certainly an opportunity. But it may not be your responsibility, but the minute they walk through the threshold of your business, it has become your problem, because it is affecting their ability to show up for you, for the organization, and for the goals and targets that you actually have. So there's a huge opportunity. When I work with an organization, I will not work with them unless they want to develop the human, not just in terms of the productivity and the profitability. If that's their measures, I'm out before we even start.
Yeah, no, super cool. Super cool. Man, we're coming to the top of the hour already. This time is flying by. All right. I want to, for the audience, I want to get them to, if they want to find you, like, how could people learn more about the work you're doing, pick up your books, if they were interested in the retreat, like, where can they find more information about you?
Yeah. The easiest thing is to go to philipmckernan.com.
Yeah. And that's with an N, McKernan.
Yeah.
Because he's Irish, right?
Yes.
Very cool. So philipmckernan.com. We're going to have that in the show notes. And anything sort of anything upcoming for you over the next couple months that people might want to lean into?
Yeah, no, I mean, we have these brave conversations where we just hold a conversation once a month about a topic that's really important in the world, or something that I feel we're not addressing, or a conversation we're unwilling to have. So I just hold the space. It's non-commercial. It's just a free event, so people can join those. And then Brave Soul is kicking off in June, and that's our kind of our big annual event. When I say big, it's small in numbers, like 18 people, but big in terms of the space and the container and so on.
Yeah.
And then I'm contemplating a new book at some point, but it's that's on the horizon. I just don't have the bandwidth for it right now.
Yeah, I'm having the same problem, my friend. Right, the motivation is there. It's just the resource and the time, and when are we going to do it? But everything comes within the right time, and it's the right path, and the universe will present the time when it's right.
Absolutely.
Philip, man, you're a gem of a human being, brother. I enjoyed today's conversation. I think very aligned with the work you do and believe in the importance of it. And for the audience, I think what becomes important about listening today to today's episode is a few things. One, it begins with leaning into the emotion. Two, it begins to second, it begins with really understanding that story and having responsibility and ownership of that story, not the superficial one, right? That we present to everyone, which is, here's my resume, right? Or here's my my preview to my movie, but the real story, which is, why do you operate and behave the way you do? And it's those emotions that drive that behavior. And if you're looking to change behavior, start with the emotions and start with the story. So, and go do Philip's retreat, go do some work, right? At the end of the episode, as you know, we come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow?
Oh, wow. I mean, I probably could give you multiple answers, but I will stick with a comment that was brought into the show today, and that's around vulnerability. So to become a better human, I think allow people to see more of you, not all of you, be respectful, but more of you, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I often say if I'm about to invest in somebody or with somebody, the thing that I want to hear from them is the words, I don't know. Because to me, that shows that they don't have all the answers and that they're willing to be open and honest and everything else. And I think if I could lead people in the direction of one specific area, it would be under the lens of parenting. I think one of the greatest parenting it's not a tool, it's an invitation, is to open up to your kids about the things that you're not proud of, the parts of you that you struggled in, and watch how your kids receive that and perceive that and how it brings you together. But the same applies for leadership, sales teams, etc. Is just let people see a little bit more of you and watch what happens and watch how you can begin to connect with others in ways that you didn't think you could.
Specifically in today's world, right? Even more important. And what was your quote? What's your famous quote?
My famous quote, which one?
Yeah, the one that you were quoted
for. Relationships move at the speed of vulnerability. That's and I amazing. Do actually believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna say this is Philip's quote. All right, the speed of relationships.
I hope it's mine. I think it's mine. But there you go. Well, I'm not sure we should own. I'm not sure we should own quotes, but there you go.
Well, listen, you can take some credit for some of them and you could share it, right? Exactly, all right. Exactly. To the audience, we will have all of Philip's information in the show notes. So if you're interested in learning more about Philip, go ahead and check out his website, philipmckernan.com. Obviously, you can find him on all the social channels as well. I'm actually connected with you on Instagram. I think we could also find you on LinkedIn. Correct?
Yeah, not very active in that. But yeah, I'm going to be more active in all of this moving forward very, very, very soon, actually, probably in the next couple of weeks.
Well, my advice to you is to hire someone to do it for you because it is a pain in the ass or it is a full-time job in some capacity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. To the audience, if you like today's episode, share it. Get it out to a friend. If you think someone that could benefit from Philip's work, go and refer the link over to them as well. And as usual, don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, smash some of those stars. It helps us get the podcast and episodes out to a broader audience because we're trying to sort of, make everyone a better human or at least, contribute to them all being a better human. And as usual, stay happy, stay healthy. We'll see you next week.